I want to tell you a story about a training I was facilitating in 2018 in Toronto with a group of telecommunications leaders focused on decision making. To give you a bit of context, next slide. Next slide. To give you a bit of context, I run the strategy team at Ability. We are a leadership development company that delivers simulation-based training all around the world. The best analogy is SimCity for leadership development. If you're not familiar with the game SimCity, in SimCity, you are the mayor of a fictitious town. In our simulation, you might be the CFO of a fictitious startup or a project manager in charge of 6 new direct reports. No matter what, you're making decisions in a competitive environment. Over 100,000 participants in more than 50 countries around the world have participated in one of our simulations. So I'm in Toronto, I'm delivering our simulation, I'm walking around the room, and I peer over the shoulder of one of the participants, and I see this on his screen. Now, I was surprised, and I guess a little bit humbled, that top leaders of Fortune 500 still turn to Google when presented with a challenge. And I give this individual credit because most of us make decisions based on our gut. And for the most part, we're supremely confident in our abilities. And it isn't just college professors who believe that they are confident in their abilities. It won't surprise you to find out that 9 out of 10 drivers believe their driving aptitude is above average. It also won't surprise you to find out that the last two statistics I shared were statistically impossible. How about the world of finance? Most of you will remember back in 2022 when economists were all aligned that we were heading into a recession. Of course, accelerating growth and no recession. So what's the conclusion? Humans are amazing, and we are extremely confident in our ability. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. We did put a man on the moon. We did map the human genome. We did create the Oreo cookie, and then create the double stuffed Oreo cookie, and then create 70 different concoctions of the same frickin' cookie. Don't let anybody tell you that humans aren't amazing. But what made that executive in Toronto unique is that most of us don't have a decision-making framework. We rely on our gut, and we assume that it's going to work out for us. In fact, about 8 out of 10 of us have an optimism bias. We believe we are going to be correct. And the optimism bias is not necessarily a bad thing. It did give us the peanut butter and jelly Oreo. But it is a cognitive bias that a decision-making framework would help us combat. So that's what myself and our team did. In 2018, we created a 3-step decision-making framework that would allow leaders at all levels to up their decision-making. Later that year, I was contacted by the TED organization, and I got on stage in Dallas to present the 3-step effective decision-making talk. I'm happy to share that over 500,000 people have seen the talk around the world, and I want to do 2 things here with you today. I want to share the decision-making framework that I shared from Dallas, and I want to talk more about the work that we've done. So this was the decision-making framework that I shared, and I am a huge proponent of stories. So I don't want to tell you exactly what the decision-making framework was. Instead, I want to tell you a story that illustrates each of the steps. And the first step is that you must challenge the constraints when making a decision. And for that, I want to take you to Stanford University. And there was a class on entrepreneurship at Stanford University. And for this class, the professor split the group of students into teams. And she handed each team an envelope. The team opens the envelope, and in the envelope is a $5 bill. And the teacher says you have one task and one task only. You need to take the $5 and turn it into the most money possible. And the final part of this activity is going to come next week, when you're all going to get together, all of the teams are going to come up on stage, and you're going to present. And you're going to say what you did and how much money you generated. So I'm sure you're all thinking right now, what would you do if presented with the same challenge? And I guess you're also probably wondering, what the heck did these brilliant Stanford students do? Well, it might surprise you to find out that the winning team didn't even use the $5 in the envelope. Instead, they spent the limited amount of time that they had going around to companies in the area, and they made the following proposal. They said, what would you pay us for the right to present to a group of brilliant Stanford students with the aim of hiring them upon graduation? In essence, the winning team challenged the constraints of the exercise, which in this case was the $5 in the envelope, and instead spent the limited amount of time that they had maximizing the real opportunity they had, which was the presentation. Effective decision-making starts by challenging the constraints. We do our simulations all around the world. And when we present a challenge to leaders, they jump in and attack the problem. People see a problem and they just want to solve it. Effective decision makers resist the instinct to solve and instead spend time challenging the constraints of the exercise. Step number 2 is that you must embrace a pre-mortem. And for this, I want to tell you a different story. And it is a story about snakes. During the era of colonialization in India, the British government was concerned about the number of venomous cobra snakes in Delhi. So the government hatched a plan, and they decided to offer a cash bounty for every dead cobra. Initially, this was an extremely good idea, as a number of snakes were killed for this new reward. Soon, people started to breed cobra snakes, explicitly for the income they could now generate. It didn't take long, the government becomes aware of this, and they quickly scrap the program for dead cobras. The cobra breeders now let their worthless snakes go. The wild cobra population was actually worse than it was initially. The apparent solution for the problem made the situation even worse. As I mentioned, 8 out of 10 of us have an optimism bias. It is very easy to forecast that we will be successful. Effective decision-making actually takes a reorientation, and you need to forecast failure. Pre-mortems allow you to do 2 things. You can either change the decision you were planning to make, or you can install safeguards on the path that you are heading. Step number 2, during an effective decision-making exercise, don't forget to embrace a pre-mortem. Step number 3 is that you must check the basics. So we've gone to Stanford University, we've gone to Delhi, India. You are all guessing and you all know where we are heading next. Of course, we are heading to Mars. In 1999, a NASA mission to study the climate of the planet Mars cost $125 million and took over 10 months of travel. Unfortunately, the Mars Climate Orbiter spacecraft burned and broke into pieces before it could conduct its mission. The fascinating thing about that failure was that it was entirely preventable. There were multiple teams working on the project. One of the teams used the metric system in their calculation, and another team provided crucial data using inches, feet, and pounds. Some of the smartest people in the world, legitimate rocket scientists, forgot to check that both of the teams were using the same unit of measurement, and the consequences were catastrophic. We do our simulation all around the world. I am blown away by teams that are able to take the complexity and formulate incredible ideas. It would shock you how many teams make a mistake in the minutia, in the minute details. When decisions become complex, it is the basics that need to be checked. Complexity requires focus on those small details. So I get off the stage in Dallas, and I knew that TED had incredible reach. I didn't know how much reach. I heard from an engineering student in Minneapolis, I heard from an MBA professor in Northern England, and I heard from a chemistry student in Egypt. And what shocked me was there was one step that seemed to resonate more than the other 2. Almost every message that I got asked me more about the pre-mortem. For some reason, that was the step that had struck a chord. So in 2020, our team started to dive in and actually looked at the pre-mortem and why it had struck a chord. It won't surprise you to find out that the post-mortem is an extremely popular concept. The vast majority of leaders that we interviewed, their teams conduct a post-mortem at the end of every project. You can go on any project management company's website and find templates to conduct a post-mortem for yourself. You can find out how often they occur. You can find a bevy of information about post-mortems. In comparison, there is limited amount of information about a pre-mortem. This is not an exaggeration to say that when our team started the research, it was this fine individual's Twitter poll that came up when we tried to figure out how often pre-mortems occur. And we came to find out that the reason is pre-mortems are tough. The vast majority of information that you need to do one is information you either don't know or information you don't know you don't know. In comparison, for the post-mortem, you know everything. You have 100% of the information that you need to conduct one. But why does the pre-mortem work, and why did it strike a chord with the people who saw the talk? Number 1 is that optimism bias. So 8 out of 10 of us have an optimism bias. You want to curb optimism bias? Tell the team that's working on a decision, we are morons, and we have to come up with 8 reasons why our project is about to fail miserably. Number two, you get to identify problems early. By the very nature of doing a premortem and forecasting failure before you make a decision, you were able to identify any problems or issues before they arise. And finally, and most impactfully, you're able to encourage creative thinking. Get a bunch of people together who just made a decision and say, we need to come up with 8 reasons why this is going to be an unmitigated failure. And that is why we believe a premortem struck a chord. So what did we do? We are a frameworks company, so we created a framework to conduct an effective premortem. And the first step is to recognize the threats. And this is that quintessential creative brainstorming session. You want to throw every idea against a wall of why this decision will fail. You want to involve any impacted parties. And what you want to do is you want to make a list of everything from the logical to the ludicrous about why this decision will fail and document everything. The next step is you're going to identify the impact of everything. And what you're going to do is you're going to say, what are the most likely failure points and what would have the biggest impact if they failed, all the way down to the least likely failure points and the things that would have the least amount of impact if they fail. And then you want to re-rank your list. And then you want to move to the third and final step, which is my favorite step. And in essence, it is another creative brainstorming step. And so everybody says, why do I have to do another creative brainstorming? Well, for the exact reason that over the course of this process up until this point, you have reoriented yourself to forecast failure. So you are actually going to stress test your initial list. And this is the only part of the talk that I would like some audience participation. So I would like everybody to put your hands as high as you can in the air right now and look at your neighbor and convince them to do the same thing. As high as you possibly can, as high as you possibly can. We are basically at 100%, and that is awesome, and everybody is wondering what we are doing all over. So everybody is as high as we can. Your arms should not hurt yet. I hope they don't hurt. Okay, go higher. Wait, everybody went higher. I said in no uncertain terms 6 times to go as physically high as you could go until it hurt. Your neighbors encourage you to go higher, and yet everybody went higher. That is the third step. The third step is to push yourself to come up with 1 or 2 reasons why you are about to make a colossal failure. We do this with leaders all around the world. It is this step that usually comes up with the 1 or 2 things that ends up being the most impactful for the premortem. The final step is this. You're going to kickstart solutions. I talked earlier about the premortem. The premortem can have 2 real things that it can do for you. One, it can actually tell you that the right path is to go on a different path. You're considering a decision, you do a premortem, and one of the failures that you identify would be too catastrophic, and you go in a different path. More likely, though, you're going to install safeguards. You're going to actually put together a monitoring plan. You're going to say, here are the 3 or 4 reasons why this could go off the rails. This is what we're going to look for if it does go off the rails. This is who's going to monitor it, and this is what's going to happen, and this is what we're going to do to mitigate it if things start to go off the rails. I have a limited amount of time left, so I want to leave you with 2 premortem what-ifs from the business world. And the first one is about Blockbuster. Who remembers Blockbuster? Wonderful organization. In 1985, Blockbuster opened their first store. By 2004, Blockbuster had 9,000 stores and a valuation over $3 billion. By 2023, Blockbuster was bankrupt and down to their 1 last remaining store. The entire Blockbuster saga is fascinating. There is a fascinating premortem what-if inside of it. In 2000, Netflix was new on the scene and unprofitable. And Netflix saw Blockbuster as their savior. They went to Blockbuster, and they presented their technology as a potential acquisition for Blockbuster. And Blockbuster laughed at them. And they especially laughed at the price, $50 million. It is important to note right now that the valuation of Netflix is about $300 billion. I have one final premortem what if. The year is 1999. Who remembers Excite as a search engine? Yeah. Okay, in 1999, Excite was the 2nd most popular search engine in the world. The most popular search engine in the world was Yahoo. Whoever said it, good job. Yahoo was the most popular search engine in the world. Google, relatively new on the scene, unprofitable, and the founders of Google, and this is true, were looking to sell their technology. Excite had recently bought 2 other search engines. So Google went to Excite, and they offered to sell them the Google technology for $1 million. And Excite passed. So Google did what I'm sure you're all guessing they did. They dropped the price to $750,000. and excite passed again. It is vital to reinforce that the valuation of Google today is close to $2 trillion. This would have altered the business world. This would have altered the technology world. This would have also altered the dictionary. I want to leave you with some pre-mortem homework. On your way home, today, tomorrow, or the next day, I want you to think about the biggest decision you have made recently, or the biggest decision that is on your doorstep today. And I want you to take it with a pre-mortem lens. I want you to forecast failure. I want you to assume that things are going to go horrifically bad. And I know a large percentage of you, probably 8 out of 10 of you, are thinking, no way, no how, no chance, I'm brilliant, I did everything right, and these are the 17 ways that things are going to work out really well for me. I urge you to try to fight that. I urge you to take a pre-mortem lens. As counterintuitive as it sounds, your ability to forecast failure is one of the most important tools you have in your decision-making arsenal. My name is Matthew Confort. I'm the VP of Strategy at Ability. I also host our firm's podcast. It's called Learn to Lead. I've had the pleasure of having some of the people speaking at the conference today on the show. If you scan the QR code, you can learn more about me and our organization, and I'd love to connect with you all on LinkedIn. I want to thank you all so much for your time. Thank you for dealing with the technology issues, and I hope you have a great rest of your conference.